A jaw-dropping development has just exploded onto the radar of investigators working the haunting disappearance of 6-year-old Lily and her brother Jack Sullivan. And tonight, an entire community is holding its breath. After nearly 3 agonizing months of silence, dead ends, and dwindling hope, a trained police K-9 has done what hundreds of human searchers could not. It has unearthed a physical clue, one that could fundamentally reshape this entire investigation. The announcement came pouring out of the search command post late this evening, sending shockwaves through the tight-knit community that has never stopped fighting for these 2 children. Investigators, volunteers, and heartbroken neighbors are all reacting in real time, and what unfolds next could be the turning point this family has been desperately praying for. Before we break down every explosive detail, take a second right now and hit that subscribe button. This story is moving fast, and you do not want to miss a single update as it drops. We are committed to bringing you the most accurate, up-to-the-minute coverage on this case around the clock. And to the Sullivan family, our hearts, our thoughts, and every ounce of compassion goes out to you tonight. If you are watching this and you want to show your support for Lily and Jack, drop your prayers and messages of hope in the comment section below. This community has never abandoned these children, and it never will. Now, let's get into exactly what happened, because this discovery is nothing short of extraordinary. It has been almost 90 days since Lily and Jack vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions, grief, and a community shattered to its core. Searches had been conducted, tips had been chased, aerial surveillance had swept the landscape, and still, nothing concrete had emerged. But yesterday afternoon, everything changed in the most unexpected way imaginable. During what was initially described as a routine scent-tracking exercise in the dense, tangled underbrush near the Lansdowne Station property, an RCMP police dog handler noticed something that stopped him cold. The K-9, a highly trained tracking dog, suddenly halted mid-stride. Its entire body stiffened. Then it began pawing aggressively at the ground with an urgency that experienced handlers immediately recognized as a genuine alert. This dog was not confused. This dog was not distracted. It had locked onto something buried beneath layers of fallen leaves and forest debris. The handler moved in swiftly and carefully began investigating the disturbed earth. What they pulled from that partially concealed patch of soil sent chills down the spine of every officer present on scene. A small, torn fragment of pink fabric, buried, hidden, waiting. Preliminary field examination of the fabric fragment immediately triggered alarm bells among lead investigators. The color, texture, and material of the torn piece appeared to match the distinctive pink jacket that 6-year-old Lily was wearing on the day she and her brother disappeared. Let that sink in for a moment. After 3 months of searching, after hundreds of tips that led nowhere, after thousands of hours of grueling fieldwork, a piece of a child's clothing has finally been recovered from the woods. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. This is confirmed physical evidence that is now bagged, tagged, and on its way to a forensic laboratory for definitive testing. Law enforcement sources confirm the find was made by an RCMP Police Dog Services unit operating in a section of the woods that investigators had previously believed was already thoroughly searched. That detail alone should send a shiver through everyone following this case. The K-9's extraordinary sense of smell led its handler back into a zone that human eyes had already dismissed, and it found what human eyes had completely missed. If forensic results confirm that this fabric belongs to Lily, it would represent something monumental. It would be the very first tangible, physical piece of evidence directly connected to either child since the morning they disappeared. As the RCMP themselves admitted back in June, despite fielding over 500 tips and conducting exhaustive search operations, nothing new had come to light. Until now, until this dog, until this moment. The significance of this discovery cannot be overstated. For months, investigators have been working in an almost impossible vacuum, chasing leads that evaporated, following trails that went cold, and facing the crushing frustration of a case that seemed determined to yield no answers. And then, in a single afternoon, a 4-legged member of the search team changed the entire equation. The torn fragment of pink fabric is now the undisputed centerpiece of a reinvigorated investigation, and what it reveals in forensic lab could determine the direction of everything that follows. Police are not waiting around for those results to start acting, either. The moment the discovery was confirmed, law enforcement sources say resources were immediately redeployed to canvass the surrounding area with fresh urgency. The RCMP issued a statement confirming that all possible scenarios are being actively considered and that search teams would be repositioned around the new location without delay. This is a department that has had K-9 units embedded in this investigation since the very first day Lily and Jack were reported missing. That commitment has never wavered. But today's alert from this particular tracking dog underscores something that no surveillance camera footage, no interview recording, and no paper trail was ever able to deliver: a concrete, physical connection to one of the missing children, buried deep in terrain that had been written off. These dogs operate on a level that is simply beyond human capability. Handlers involved in the case have repeatedly emphasized that a trained scent dog can detect human odor and personal belongings even weeks after contact, sometimes across miles of difficult terrain in challenging weather conditions. The moment this K-9 froze and began digging, it was telling investigators something that no other tool in their arsenal could communicate. Retired Detective Jim Hoskins, a seasoned investigator who has been closely monitoring this case from the outside, weighed in with sobering but important analysis. According to Hoskins, the investigation at this point realistically narrows down to two broad and deeply troubling possibilities. Either Lily and Jack became severely disoriented and wandered far deeper into the wilderness than anyone had previously estimated, or something far more sinister occurred, and foul play cannot be dismissed. This freshly uncovered clue, Hoskins noted, has the potential to lend weight to either scenario depending on what the forensic examination ultimately reveals. If Lily's jacket fragment was carried deep into the bush naturally, torn from her clothing as she pushed through dense undergrowth, it may suggest the siblings traveled a much greater distance from home than search teams had originally mapped. But there is a darker possibility that investigators are refusing to ignore. Some forensic and law enforcement experts caution that a piece of clothing found buried beneath leaves and soil does not always mean it arrived there by accident. If the fabric was deliberately moved and concealed, if it was placed in that location by another person, then the implications shift dramatically and terrifyingly. An abduction scenario, or worse, would suddenly demand an entirely different investigative response. To be absolutely clear, as of this moment, the RCMP has not confirmed any evidence of abduction. Officials have consistently maintained throughout this case that there is no concrete evidence to suggest the children were taken by anyone. Their standing position has been that Lily and Jack, most likely, wandered away from the property. But in the wake of this discovery, detectives are now openly stating that nothing can be ruled out with certainty. Every door remains open. Corporal Sandy Matt of the Northeast Nova Major Crime Unit, the lead investigator steering this case, addressed the public with measured but pointed words. In an official press release, Corporal Matt emphasized that the team has been operating with a deeply coordinated and deliberately methodical approach, ensuring that every fragment of information is put under the microscope. The K-9 discovery, she confirmed, will be immediately incorporated into that analytical framework. Tonight, the command post is buzzing with renewed energy, and by first light tomorrow, ground teams will be fanning out across the newly identified zone with one singular, driving purpose: finding Lily and Jack Sullivan. If you have followed this case in the beginning, you know how desperately this community has needed a moment like this. Share this video right now so that as many eyes as possible are on this story tonight. Every share matters. The ripple effects of this discovery are spreading rapidly through every layer of this investigation, and the community that has stood vigil for Lily and Jack Sullivan since May is feeling something tonight that has been dangerously scarce for months: genuine, electrifying hope. Search and Rescue Coordinator Amy Hansen, a veteran volunteer manager who has dedicated countless hours to this specific case, had previously and publicly expressed her firm belief that the children were somewhere in those woods. She held that position even when the evidence trail had gone completely silent, even when skeptics questioned whether the search area was correctly identified, even when momentum seemed to be fading. Tonight, The K-9's extraordinary find deep in the forest appears to validate everything Hansen and her team have been saying all along. On social media platforms, the reaction has been nothing short of explosive. Supporters who have been quietly holding on to hope from the sidelines are suddenly re-energized with fierce, renewed intensity. Community groups that have been growing quieter over recent weeks have erupted back to life overnight. Mapping enthusiasts and amateur investigators are already dissecting satellite images of the newly searched terrain, marking coordinates, tracing possible pathways, and speculating passionately about what lies beyond the spot where the fabric was recovered. Parents of young children are sharing the story with trembling hands. Former volunteers who had stepped back from the physical search are now reaching out to coordinators, asking how they can return and help. This is what one small torn piece of pink fabric has done to an entire community. It has reignited a fire that the darkness of 3 months was slowly trying to extinguish. But even as the emotional surge sweeps through neighborhoods and online forums alike, law enforcement officials are urging measured restraint. Police spokespersons have been careful and deliberate in their messaging, reminding the public that while the fabric fragment is being treated as a highly significant lead, it is absolutely not a definitive answer to anything. Not yet. Not until the forensic laboratory completes its full analysis and returns a confirmed identification of the material. Investigators are professionals who understand better than anyone the catastrophic cost of chasing the wrong conclusion. They have seen cases derailed by premature assumptions. They are not going to allow that to happen here. Every conclusion, every next move, every resource deployment will be grounded in verified evidence and nothing less. That said, the discovery has already triggered a swift and dramatic restructuring of the entire search strategy on the ground. Police spokespersons confirm that search teams are now being systematically deployed in a precise, grid pattern around the exact location where the fabric was recovered. K-9 units are resuming active tracking operations, using the discovery site as their new ground zero. Handlers will work outward from that point in every direction, allowing the dogs to follow whatever scent trails might still be detectable in the surrounding terrain. Every inch of that expanded perimeter will be treated as a potential crime scene until investigators determine otherwise. Nothing will be walked past. Nothing will be assumed irrelevant. Law enforcement experts observing the case from outside the investigation have noted that the location of the fabric fragment raises an urgent and pressing question that now sits at the very heart of the search operation. If the torn piece of Lily's jacket was recovered in that specific area of the woods, it strongly implies that both children were present at or near that location at some point after their disappearance. Where did they go from there? That question is now driving every decision being made at the command post. If Lily and Jack continued moving through the forest on their own, K-9 handlers will be searching for any surviving scent trails, footprints pressed into soft earth, broken branches at child height, or disturbed vegetation that might indicate a direction of travel. Investigators will attempt to reconstruct a pathway and follow it as far as the evidence allows. However, if someone else was present at that location, if another person made contact with the children at or near that spot, the search immediately transforms into something far more urgent and far more dangerous. Officers would then be looking for tire tracks on nearby access roads, discarded personal items, signs of recent human activity in the surrounding bush, and any evidence that a vehicle was parked within a reasonable distance. The investigation would shift gears entirely. Right now, both possibilities are being pursued with equal ferocity. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. What do you believe happened to Lily and Jack? A former detective with extensive missing persons experience, speaking independently and not connected to the active investigation, offered a theory overnight that has been circulating rapidly through online communities following this case. This investigator suggested that the location of the fabric fragment may directly contradict one of the earliest and most widely held assumptions about what happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan. From almost the very beginning, the prevailing theory put forward by authorities and accepted by much of the public was that the two young children simply wandered away from home, perhaps chasing something that caught their attention, perhaps getting turned around in familiar-looking terrain, and ultimately becoming hopelessly lost in the vast wilderness surrounding the Sullivan property on Gearlock Road. It was a heartbreaking scenario, but it was also considered the most straightforward explanation available given the absence of any evidence pointing elsewhere. But this newly recovered piece of clothing challenges that narrative in a way that demands serious examination. If Lily's pink jacket fragment ended up buried beneath leaves in a deeply wooded area that sits well beyond the range most people expect two young children to reach on their own, then either the children traveled an astonishing and almost unbelievable distance through dense, disorienting bush, or something or someone played a role in how that fabric ended up where the K-9 found it. The former detective put it plainly and without hesitation. Children that age, in that terrain, under those conditions, do not typically cover that kind of ground independently, without leaving far more visible traces along the way. The fact that this spot had already been searched and cleared by human teams before the K-9 circled back to it makes the discovery even more difficult to explain away casually. There are two distinct interpretations being discussed in investigative circles, and both deserve careful attention. The first interpretation supports the wandering theory, but expands its scope dramatically. Perhaps Lily dropped or tore the fabric from her jacket as she and Jack pushed through thick undergrowth, moving deeper and deeper into forest in a direction no one anticipated. Children in distress sometimes move erratically and cover surprising distances driven purely by fear and adrenaline. If this is what happened, it means the children travel much farther than the original search perimeter accounted for, and the new grid being established around the discovery site may finally put searchers in the right territory for the first time. That possibility alone is enough to justify the complete redeployment of every available resource. The second interpretation is darker and considerably more difficult to sit with. If the fabric was deliberately buried, if it was carried to that location and concealed beneath leaves and soil by another person, then investigators are potentially looking at evidence of human interference in this case. Someone who wanted to hide a connection. Someone who was present in those woods after Lily and Jack disappeared. Someone who, for whatever reason, had possession of a piece of a 6-year-old girl's clothing and chose to bury it rather than leave it in plain sight. This interpretation does not yet have evidence to confirm it, but it cannot be dismissed, and investigators have made absolutely clear they are not dismissing it. Every scenario remains on the table. Throughout all of this, the RCMP has continued to appeal directly and urgently to the public for assistance. Authorities are specifically asking anyone who was in the vicinity of Gearlock Road on May 2nd, the day Lily and Jack were last seen, to come forward immediately, regardless of whether they believe their information is relevant or significant. They are also asking the public to focus carefully on anything they may have noticed along the wooded trails and access paths running behind the Sullivan family home. A tip that seems minor to the person holding it could be the exact thread that unravels this entire case. The reward for credible information currently sits at $150,000, and sources close to the investigation confirm that the tip line has been receiving a surge of new calls ever since news of the K-9 discovery broke publicly this evening. Even the smallest detail, a car parked somewhere unusual, a figure walking where they should not have been, a sound heard from tree line, could matter enormously right now. If you know something, please call the Northeast Nova Major Crime Unit at 902-896-5060 or submit an anonymous tip directly to Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers. Do not wait. Do not assume someone else has already called it in. Make that call tonight. Share this video everywhere you can, because the more people who see the story, the greater the chance that someone with a crucial piece of information finally comes forward for Lily and Jack. Tonight, inside the Sullivan family home, a mother and father are sitting with the most complicated mixture of emotions a human heart can possibly hold. For nearly 3 months, this family has existed in a state of suspended agony, waking up every single morning to the unbearable reality that their 2 youngest children are somewhere out there, unreachable, unfound, and desperately missed. Every day without answers has been its own unique form of torment. Every press conference that ended without a breakthrough. Every search team that returned empty-handed. Every night that fell without Lily and Jack walking back through that front door. The Sullivan family has endured all of it with a quiet, dignified strength that has moved everyone watching the story from the very beginning. And tonight, for the first time in what feels like an eternity, they have been given something they have not had in far too long, a reason to believe that the end of this nightmare might finally be within reach. The children's family has been formally briefed on the K-9 discovery by investigators and is understandably maintaining an extremely low profile as they process what this development means. Their spokesperson released a statement on their behalf that struck directly at the heart of everyone who read it. The Sullivan family extended their deepest and most sincere gratitude to the RCMP and every single person who has refused to give up on finding Lily and Jack. They described this breakthrough as a ray of hope piercing through what has been an overwhelmingly dark and devastating period of their lives. In the same breath, they asked with quiet dignity for privacy and space as they wait anxiously for forensic results and further updates from the investigation. Their focus right now is singular and unwavering. They want their children home. Across the broader community, the reaction to tonight's news has been deeply emotional and profoundly unifying. Weekly vigils and prayer gatherings have been a constant invisible feature of this community's response to the Sullivan children's disappearance since the very early days of the search. Neighbors, strangers, church groups, school communities, and people who have never even met the Sullivan family have shown up week after week with candles, with signs, with folded hands and heavy hearts, refusing to let the world forget that 2 children are missing and that they deserve to be found. Tonight, those candles were lit once again. And this time, the flames felt different. They felt like something more than grief. They felt like defiance, like a community telling the darkness that it is not won. Not yet. Not while there is still a lead to follow. An AK-9 alert pointing toward answers. The outpouring of support flooding social media platforms tonight is unlike anything this case has generated in weeks. Tribute posts and prayer threads are multiplying by the hour. People who had been quietly following the story from across the country are suddenly sharing updates, tagging news outlets, and demanding that national attention return to Nova Scotia and to the Sullivan family. True crime communities that monitor missing persons cases with dedicated intensity have erupted with analysis, timelines, and calls to action. The story is spreading. The conversation is growing louder. And that matters enormously because visibility in a case like this is not just emotional support. It is a practical investigative tool. Every new pair of eyes on this story is another potential witness who might suddenly connect a memory to what they are reading and reach for their phone too. Call the tip line. The investigators working this case around the clock understand that public engagement is one of their most powerful assets. That is precisely why the RCMP has been as transparent as operational security allows, holding press conferences, releasing details strategically, and now confirming the K-9 discovery despite the early stage of forensic analysis. They want the public involved. They need the public involved. Because somewhere out there, someone knows something about what happened on Gearlock Road on May 2nd. Someone drove past and noticed something unusual. Someone heard something from the tree line behind the Sullivan property. Someone saw a vehicle parked somewhere it had no business being. Someone is sitting on a piece of this puzzle right now, possibly without even fully understanding its value. And the investigators at the Northeast Nova Major Crime Unit are counting on that person to come forward before another day passes. The tip line number is 902-896-5060. Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers also accepts completely anonymous submissions for anyone concerned about identification. Please share this video right now. Post it everywhere. Text it to someone who lives near that area. Because Lily and Jack Sullivan are still out there, and every single person watching this video is part of the effort to bring them home. From the very first day the search began, there's been one group of contributors working this case whose dedication, precision, and extraordinary capability has never received the recognition it fully deserves. They do not give interviews. They do not hold press conferences. They do not post on social media or seek acknowledgement for what they do. They simply work, nose to the ground, senses locked onto invisible threads of scent that the human world cannot perceive, moving through forest and field and undergrowth with a singular, focused purpose. The police K-9 units embedded in this investigation have been present and operational since the morning Lily and Jack Sullivan were first reported missing. And this week, one of those remarkable animals did something that changed everything. A German shepherd, harnessed and focused, working alongside its RCMP handler through a stretch of dense Nova Scotia woodland. stopped at a patch of ground the human searchers had already walked past, and refused to move on. What that dog communicated in that moment of frozen, intense alertness cannot be replicated by any piece of technology currently available to law enforcement. There is no drone, no ground-penetrating radar, no thermal imaging system that could have found a small, buried fragment of pink fabric beneath layers of decomposing leaves and forest soil in that specific location on that specific afternoon. It took an animal whose entire existence is oriented around detecting the invisible, a creature whose bond with handlers built on absolute trust and years of rigorous, demanding training, to crack open a case that had been sealed shut for almost 3 months. The moment that K9 began pawing urgently at the earth, it was not simply finding evidence. It was issuing a declaration that this search was far from over, that there were still answers hidden in those woods, that Lily and Jack had not been swallowed entirely by silence. The handler's report of what followed the initial alert paint a vivid and deeply moving picture of how quickly the discovery escalated. The moment the fabric fragment was pulled from the ground, officers on site immediately called for backup. Within a short period of time, a formal evidence tent had been erected around the discovery site, transforming a quiet patch of forest into a fully operational forensic scene. Investigators in protective gloves moved through the immediate surrounding area with painstaking, methodical precision, examining every square inch of ground, every disturbed leaf, every broken twig, searching for anything else that might have been left behind at that location. The site was treated with the full weight and seriousness of a primary evidence location from the very first moment, because that is exactly what it is. As of tonight, officials have confirmed the discovery of the pink fabric fragment and nothing beyond that. No suspects have been named. No additional physical evidence has been publicly disclosed. No arrests have been made. The forensic testing process will take the time it requires, and investigators have been disciplined in refusing to speculate publicly beyond what the evidence currently supports. That discipline is not a sign of stagnation. It is a sign of a professional, experienced investigative team that understands the profound responsibility of getting this right, for the evidence for the case, and most importantly, for Lily and Jack Sullivan and the family that loves them with every fiber of their being. Tomorrow morning, as the first light breaks over the Nova Scotia treeline, ground teams will move out once again. This time, they will carry something they have not had since the earliest days of the search: a fixed point, a confirmed location, a forensic anchor from which every next step will be measured and mapped. The K9 units will resume tracking from that spot with fresh commands and renewed urgency. Grid teams will work outward systematically, leaving nothing unchecked. Every trail, every access road, every opening in the canopy where a child might have paused or a person might have stopped, all of it will be examined with fresh, determined eyes. The search for Lily and Jack Sullivan has just entered its most critical and most promising phase. This community has carried an unbearable weight for 3 months. It has grieved, it has searched, it has prayed, and it has refused, absolutely refused, to let go. Tonight, a single K9 alert in a darkened stretch of forest has handed that community the one thing it needed most. Not an answer, not yet, but a direction, a thread, a reason to get up tomorrow and keep going. For the Sullivan family waiting by the phone. For the volunteers lacing up their boots before dawn. For every person who has lit a candle or whispered a prayer for 2 children they have never met. This is a moment to hold on tighter than ever before. If you have any information whatsoever about Lily and Jack Sullivan or the recent discovery in the woods near Gearlock Road, please contact the Northeast Nova Major Crime Unit right now at 902-896-5060 or submit your tip anonymously through Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers.